He's not with me. Get him out. 6 years of marriage, erased in 5 words. Every conversation at the country club stopped the second my wife said them. For a moment, I actually thought I'd misheard her. The string quartet was still playing somewhere behind the crowd, and I remember thinking, absurdly, that this was the kind of thing that only happened in movies, not from the mouth of the woman who used to fall asleep with her hand flat against my chest, so she could feel me breathing. Then she walked toward me, slow, deliberate, like she'd rehearsed the distance. She stopped close enough that only I could see her eyes, and she smiled. Not the smile from our wedding photos. Not the smile from the hospital room the night our daughter was born. A different smile. The kind that's been rehearsed in a mirror until it stopped looking like anything human. She reached over and took another man's hand, then raised her voice just enough for the tables nearest us to hear. You heard me, Nathan. You don't work here. You don't belong here. Stop humiliating yourself. Somebody laughed into their napkin. A woman 2 tables over leaned toward her husband and whispered, not quietly enough. Wait, is that her husband? The man holding my wife's hand, tall, silver at the temples, the kind of tan that comes from a boat rather than a beach, looked at me the way you'd look at a parking valet who'd wandered into the wrong dining room. Mild annoyance. Nothing more. Then he lifted 2 fingers toward the maitre d', the same gesture you'd use to ask for the check. He's leaving, he said. See him out. A young staffer in a black vest approached, apologetic before he even opened his mouth. Sir, I'll need to walk you out. I looked around the room. 40, maybe 50 people I'd known for years. People whose kids were in school with mine. People who'd been to my house for cookouts, and not one of them said a word. 2 of them had their phones up, filming low against their hips like they thought I couldn't tell. My wife, Renata, crossed her arms and said, quiet enough that it was almost gentle, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. You should have taken the hint months ago. I could have ended the entire evening with 1 sentence. I want you to understand that. 1 sentence, and every person in that room would have set their glass down and gone very, very quiet. I didn't say it. I nodded at the staffer, thanked him for doing his job. He looked more uncomfortable than I did, and walked to the door. That was the moment they all believed they'd won. What none of them knew. Not Renata, not the man with the tan whose name I'll get to, not the board members clinking glasses by the bar, was that the club itself, the land it sat on, and 40% of that man's own company had been quietly held, for the last 11 years, by a trust with my name on the only signature line that mattered. But that's not the part of this that still wakes me up at 3 in the morning. The part that keeps me up is this. Why did I let it happen? Why did I stand there and take it in front of everyone I knew without saying a single word in my own defense? Because if I'd spoken 30 seconds sooner, none of what came next would have happened the way it needed to. And I needed it to happen exactly that way, because there was someone else in that room I hadn't come to save myself from. I'd come to protect 100 people who didn't even know they needed protecting. To understand that, you have to go back 7 years, to a promise I made myself after a woman named Claire left the day she thought I'd lost everything I had. If you're enjoying stories like this one, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe so you don't miss what we post next. 7 years earlier. If you told me back then that the woman I was about to marry would one day have me thrown out of a building I secretly owned, I'd have laughed you out of the room. The Renata I fell for wasn't cruel. She wasn't a woman who checked the label before she checked the person. At least, that's who I believed she was. We met at a laundromat, of all places, 2 blocks from my apartment, on a Sunday when the building's own machines were broken. Her dryer ate her quarters. I had extras in my coat pocket. She bought me a coffee from the vending machine to say thanks, and we ended up sitting on a bench outside for 2 hours while our clothes tumbled behind the glass. She told me about growing up in a house where the heat got shut off twice one winter, and that she never wanted to marry someone chasing status, because she'd watched it hollow out people she loved. I remember thinking, finally, someone who isn't auditioning me. After Claire, after watching someone I'd planned to spend my life with pack a bag within a week of believing my company's biggest deal had collapsed, I wasn't looking for someone impressive. I was looking for someone who'd stay when the numbers were bad. I didn't need her to love money. I needed her to not need it. For a long time, Renata made me believe I'd found her. We spent that whole first spring doing the kind of things that cost nothing and mean everything. Free days at the botanical garden, grocery store wine on her fire escape, a road trip up the coast in my old truck with the check engine light already on. She fell asleep in the passenger seat outside a diner in some town I couldn't find on a map again if you paid me, and I remember thinking I would never need anything more complicated than this. What she didn't know is that I'd made myself a rule after Claire, and in 7 years I never broke it. Whoever came next would have to fall for the man before they ever learned what the man was worth. So I lived small on purpose. A rented 2-bedroom, a truck with 90,000 miles on it, and a dent in the tailgate I never bothered to hammer out. I told people I did operations consulting for family-owned businesses, which was true in the same way a lighthouse is technically a building, accurate and beside the point. I never mentioned that my grandfather's holding company quietly owned pieces of the businesses I consulted for, or that I chaired a trust that made the actual decisions behind 3 regional companies, including, as it happened, the hospitality group that would one day employ my wife, and the club where she'd one day have me removed. My grandfather built that trust out of a single dry cleaning business and a stubborn refusal to ever let his name appear on anything. Money makes people perform for you, he told me once. You'll never know who actually likes you until you've been poor in front of them. I didn't understand him then. I understood him completely the night Claire's suitcase wheels clicked across our hardwood floor. Renata never asked why I drove what I drove, or why my consulting clients never called on weekends. She used to say she loved that I wasn't one of those guys performing success at everyone. I took that as a compliment for 6 years. I know better now. We got married in her parents' backyard. 60 guests, a rented tent that leaked in one corner, her uncle's barbecue instead of a caterer. It was, without question, the best day of my life up to that point. I still don't know if it was hers. 18 months later, our daughter, Lily, was born on a Tuesday in March, 4 days early. Renata held her before I did, and when the nurse finally handed Lily to me, Renata looked up and said my name. Just my name, nothing else, in a voice I'd never heard her use before. I remember thinking that was the safest I would ever feel. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet, and for a while, it didn't matter. The first crack didn't come from a lie. It came from a question at a dinner party thrown by one of her new coworkers about 2 years into the marriage, right around the time she'd been promoted into the events division at a hospitality group called Harlow and Vance. Everyone at that table talked about lake houses and ski trips and a coworker's new Range Rover. Renata laughed along, complimented the wine, asked good questions about someone's renovation. On the drive home, though, she went quiet, then asked, staring out the window at the streetlights sliding past, "Do you ever worry we're behind?" "Behind who?" I asked. "Everyone," she said. Then, smaller, almost to herself, "I don't want to spend my whole life, almost." I told her success wasn't a race, that I'd take our leaking tent and skipping speaker over anyone's Range Rover. She smiled, but it didn't sit right on her face, and it was gone before I could say anything else about it. Lily was 2 by then, in a car seat behind us, asleep with her head tipped sideways the way toddlers sleep like they've been shot out of the sky. I remember glancing back at her in the mirror and thinking, whatever this is, I'll fix it before it touches her. I didn't know it yet, but that was the night the foundation started to give, and I wasted the better part of a year telling myself it hadn't. His name was Cole Ashford, Executive VP of the Events Division, and 6 months after that dinner party, Renata's new direct supervisor. I met him for the first time at a company holiday party I almost didn't go to. He had the kind of handshake that made you feel like you'd already agreed to something before he'd asked you anything. He remembered names on the first try, tipped in cash loud enough that the bartender would say something nice about him. He complimented my truck, unprompted, in a way that made it clear he thought it was a joke he was being polite enough not to make. At first I liked hearing about him. Renata would come home talking about a pitch he'd praised, a project he'd handed her because he saw leadership in her. I was glad she had a boss who believed in her. I wish now I'd noticed how often his name came up before I noticed anything else. By the spring it was in nearly every sentence she said about her day. Cole thought. Cole said, I told myself that was just what it sounded like when someone had a good boss. I've since learned it's also, sometimes, exactly what it sounds like when someone doesn't. The late nights started small. Once a week, then 3 times, then most nights. Client dinner. Cole needs the deck redone before the board sees it. Lily started asking, at bedtime, why mommy wasn't home yet, and I started running out of answers that didn't sound like excuses I was making for someone else. None of it, on its own, sounded unreasonable. Trust isn't built by cross-examining every excuse. It's built by choosing to believe the person you married, over and over, until believing them stops being a choice and starts being a reflex. So I did. For a while, I picked up more of the bedtime routines, learned to braid hair badly, and told myself this was a season, not a pattern. One Thursday, I decided to surprise her. I picked up dinner from the Ethiopian place we went on our first real date and drove to her office, thinking we could eat in the car like we used to. The security guard in the lobby knew me by sight. "She's not up there," he said, glancing at his screen. Whole floor cleared out by 6. It was 7:40. I told myself, client dinner ran off-site, phone died, 100 harmless explanations, because the mind will hand you 100 of them before it makes you look at the one that actually hurts. I sat in the parking garage for 20 minutes before I finally drove home. By the time I got there, the food was cold, and so was I. She walked in an hour later, laptop bag over her shoulder, cheeks a little flushed from the cold, and asked why I looked like that. "I thought you were working late," I said, keeping my voice easy. A half-second freeze, then a laugh. Cole wrapped early. A few of us grabbed a drink. My phone died, I swear. I wanted to believe her. So I let myself, and told myself the guard had been wrong about the time. That's the quiet danger of love. Sometimes trust isn't something you earn. It's something the other person just decides to keep handing over, evidence or not. Because the alternative is admitting you don't recognize your own life anymore. A week later, her phone lit up on the bathroom counter while she showered. I wasn't a phone checker. 6 years of marriage, I'd never once looked. But the preview stayed lit long enough for me to see the name. Cole. Tonight was the first time in months I actually laughed. Thank you for that. I told myself it could mean anything. Then the water shut off, and she came out smiling the same warm smile I'd trusted since a laundromat bench, and asked if I wanted to watch something before bed. I said sure. I said nothing about the phone. I understand now that the worst betrayals never start on the day you find them out. They start on the day someone decides you're the kind of person who won't ask the question. I didn't confront her. Instead, I started noticing. The new perfume, a dress I'd never seen with the tags cut off. A bracelet she said was a team incentive gift from a division that, as far as I knew, had never once given anyone so much as a gift card. Then the bank called, asking me to confirm a request to raise the daily transfer limit on our joint savings account. Renata said she'd forgotten to mention it. A coworker's condo down payment. Nothing decided yet. She'd never once made a financial move without looping me in. Not in 6 years. That night, after Lily was asleep, I called an old friend, Marcus, who'd spent 2 decades in corporate investigations before going independent. We'd grown up 2 houses apart. He was the only person outside my own family who knew what the trust actually was. "I think I'm losing my mind," I told him. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe you already know, and you're calling me for permission to admit it." He told me not to accuse, to document. Liars don't get caught because they're careless, Nathan. They get caught because keeping a second life running is exhausting, and eventually something slips. Your job right now isn't to catch her. It's to notice. So I stopped arguing with myself and started paying attention. The picture that broke it open was almost funny in hindsight. She texted me from a conference in Denver. A photo out a hotel window, an office tower reflected in the glass. I recognized that tower. It was 4 blocks from my own office. That morning's newspaper sat on the windowsill in the shot, date and all, perfectly legible if you zoomed in. She wasn't in Denver. She'd never left the city. That night she came home with a canvas tote of conference swag and told me, in specific, confident detail, about a keynote speaker who did not exist at a conference she had never attended. I let her talk. Every detail she invented was another brick in a wall I hadn't asked her to build. 3 weeks after that, I stopped by her office to drop off a security badge she'd left on the kitchen counter the day before Harlow and Vance's annual Founders Gala. The same gala where, weeks later, I'd be walked out the front door in front of everyone we knew. The conference room door was open a few inches. I heard Cole's voice before I reached it, low and easy, the voice of a man who'd said this kind of thing successfully before. 6 more weeks, and none of it touches us. The Whitfield contracts clear escrow, the audit closes clean, and by the time anyone's looking twice, it's somebody else's signature on the paper. Then Renata. Nathan still doesn't suspect anything. Laughter, hers and his. Cole again, good. Keep him thinking everything's fine until after the gala. We can't afford a mess before the Whitfield deal closes. Trust me, this isn't my first rodeo. Last time, nobody even looked twice until it was somebody else's problem. Last time, I stood in that hallway for a long moment, those 2 words doing something to my stomach that the affair itself hadn't managed. This wasn't just a marriage falling apart. It was a plan with a schedule and a precedent, and I was a variable somebody had already accounted for. I set the badge on the front desk, turned around, and walked back to my car without anyone seeing me at all. I called Marcus that night and told him everything. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "Who benefits if this blows up publicly and messily right before this gala?" "Renata," I said. "Who else?" "Cole," I finally said. "But I don't know why. He's not the one married to me." "That's what I'm going to find out," Marcus said. It took him 9 days. When he finally called, he didn't bother with hello. "Cole Ashford isn't his real last name," he said. "He changed it 11 years ago, after leaving a hospitality firm in Ohio under what the trade press generously called a mutual parting of ways. Before that, he was involved with the wife of a managing partner there, helped himself to a little over $2 million in falsified vendor payments, funneled through the partner's own household accounts, using her signature. She lost everything in the divorce. He walked away with a new name and a glowing reference from somebody who just wanted him gone quietly. "Nathan," Marcus said, "this isn't a guy who fell for your wife. This is a guy with a method. He finds women close to the money who feel invisible in their own marriages, and makes them feel seen right up until he needs their signature." That should have made me angrier at Renata. For a few minutes, it mostly made me sad for her. And then, right behind the sadness, colder than I expected, determined to make sure it didn't happen to whoever came after her. In the weeks that followed, I did something I'd never done in 7 years of deliberately staying out of the trust's daily business. I asked for the complete Harlow and Vance file, going back 3 years, and read every page myself. Here's what neither Renata nor Cole knew. The trust I'd inherited from my grandfather held a controlling stake in Harlow and Vance, acquired 11 years earlier, long before I ever set foot in that laundromat. I sat on it the way you'd sit on a spare key you hoped you'd never need. I read the quarterly reports differently that month. Vendor contracts pushed through without proper board review. Always in the weeks Renata mentioned working closest with Cole. A shell entity called Whitfield Logistics receiving consulting fees for work no one could quite describe. Numbers that were each, alone, forgettable, and together, deeply not. Cole hadn't fallen for my wife by accident. He'd found the person closest to the trust's blind spot and made her useful to him. I hired an independent forensic auditor, a woman named Priya, recommended by Marcus. It took her 5 weeks. In that time, I kept coming home for dinner. I kept doing bedtime with Lily, reading the same 3 books in the same order because she wouldn't accept substitutions. I kept sitting across from Renata at the kitchen counter, watching her lie to me in small, practiced ways, and saying nothing. There was one night, about a week before the gala, when Lily crawled into our bed at 2 a.m. after a nightmare and fell asleep between us, one small hand fisted in the front of my shirt. I lay there in the dark and let myself, just once, feel exactly how much this was going to cost all 3 of us. Then I got up and read the audit summary one more time until the feeling passed. The night before the gala, Renata came home unusually quiet, snapped at Lily over something small, and spent 40 minutes on the back porch on a call she said was work, the rhythm of someone reassuring somebody else that everything was still fine. I already knew it wasn't. I just hadn't decided yet exactly how she'd find out. The night of the gala, the ballroom at the club looked like something out of a magazine. String lights over the terrace, a jazz trio warming up near the bar, a room full of people who'd built careers on being impressed with each other. Renata wore a green gown I'd never seen before and told me, adjusting my collar with a hand that wasn't quite steady, "Please, for once, don't embarrass me tonight." I looked at her for a long moment. I looked for the girl on the laundromat bench who said she never wanted to marry someone chasing status. I didn't find her. I don't know if I'd simply loved a version of her I'd built myself, piece by piece, out of someone doing her best impression of a person who didn't want more. Cole met us just inside the door, champagne in hand, and shook my hand a beat too long. "Nathan, didn't think you'd make it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. He smiled like a man checking a box. I let him. Priya's report was already sitting, printed and signed, with the chairwoman of Harlow and Vance, along with a very specific set of instructions about timing. That's the part you already heard. He's not with me. The hand-in-hand walk to the exit. The staffer's apologetic face. 40 people who'd known me for years, saying nothing, filming instead. I want you to understand why I let it happen exactly the way it did. The Real board of Harlow and Vance, the one that answered to the trust, not to Cole, was seated at the head table 12 feet away. They weren't going to hear the truth from me, standing there red-faced and defensive. They were about to hear it from someone they already, completely, trusted. 15 minutes after I was walked out, I was let back in through the kitchen entrance by the club's general manager, a man named Percy who had quietly worked for my family for over a decade. He'd been expecting my call for 3 days. "They really did march you out the front door," he said, shaking his head as he unlocked the service entrance. "They did. You could have told me sooner. I'd have let you skip the humiliation part." I needed the humiliation part, I told him, and I meant it. The lights dimmed. The company's outgoing chairwoman, a sharp, silver-haired woman named Eleanor Voss, who'd built half of Harlow and Vance's original client list herself, stepped up to the podium to make what everyone in that room assumed would be a routine end-of-night toast. Instead, she unfolded a single card. "Before we close tonight," she said, "I want to acknowledge someone most of you have never properly met, despite the fact that his family's trust has held a controlling interest in this company for over a decade." A ripple went through the room, the kind of confused, curious murmur that happens right before people realize they should be paying closer attention. Cole's smile faltered first. Renata's took a half-second longer, but it went, all at once, like a light switched off. "Please join me in welcoming the chairman of the Ashworth Family Trust, majority holder of Harlow and Vance, and, as of this afternoon, the person who requested tonight's independent audit findings be read into the record, Nathan Ashworth." The room didn't gasp, not exactly. It went silent in that specific way a room goes silent when 100 people realize, all at once, that they've been wrong about something for a long time, and are frantically trying to recalculate everything they said in the last 20 minutes. I walked back through the same doors I'd been walked out of 10 minutes earlier, past the same staffer, who mouthed sorry the moment he saw me. I gave him a small nod. None of this had ever been his fault, and I made sure, later, that he knew it. I took the podium. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Most of you have worked near me, or served me dinner, or sat across a table from me at this club, without ever knowing who I actually was. That wasn't an accident. I've always believed you learn more about people by being invisible to them than by being important to them. Tonight, I learned exactly what I needed to. A few uncomfortable laughs, scattered, dying fast. I looked at Renata. She'd gone the color of the tablecloth in front of her, one hand gripping the back of a chair like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Some of you decided what I was worth based on the truck I drive, or the watch I don't wear, or the fact that I've never once corrected anyone who assumed I worked in operations. That's fine. That was the whole point. One of you decided what I was worth based on how easily you thought you could manage me, replace me, and write me out of my own life before I noticed. That was a mistake. Then Eleanor took the microphone back and read the rest, calm and clinical, while the room sat in a silence so complete you could hear ice settling in glasses 3 tables back. An independent audit, commissioned 6 weeks earlier at my request, had found that Cole Ashford, real name Cole Hendricks, previously employed under a different name at a hospitality firm in Ohio, had funneled just under $4 million through a shell entity called Whitfield Logistics, incorporated by his own sister-in-law, and that Renata's signature appeared on 11 of the disbursement approvals that made it possible. Security, Real Security, the kind hired for exactly this evening and not the club's usual staff, was already standing at Cole's table before Eleanor finished the sentence. Cole stood up so fast his chair went over backward. "This is absurd. I want my attorney. This is a coordinated." "It's coordinated," I said, into the microphone, quiet enough that the room had to lean in to hear it. "You're right about that part." Renata stood too, slower, her hand still on the chair. "Nathan, please, it isn't." "It's exactly what it looks like," I said. Not angry, just done, in a way I hadn't expected to feel yet. A tired, clean kind of done, like setting down something heavy I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it had weight. The part that hurts isn't tonight. It's realizing I lost you a long time before tonight, and I just wasn't ready to admit I'd already noticed. She didn't have an answer for that. I don't think there was one. I signed the divorce filing 6 weeks later, not out of spite, out of finally valuing myself enough to stop calling silence, keeping the peace, and out of wanting Lily to grow up watching her father choose honesty over comfort. The audit went further than even I expected. Nearly $4 million recovered. Cole Hendricks, facing fraud charges in 2 states, with the Ohio case reopened once prosecutors realized who they were dealing with. Renata cooperated with investigators in exchange for a lesser charge tied to the falsified approvals, avoided prison, and lost her career the same week his ended for good. We share custody of Lily. It is, most weeks, more civil than I expected, and considerably less civil than I'd hoped. As for me, I sold my personal stake in the club within the year, but stayed on with the trust more actively than ever before. I stopped hiding quite so completely, not for recognition, but because I finally understood what my grandfather meant about needing to know who actually likes you before it's poured out in the open. Hiding hadn't protected me. It had just delayed the reckoning. I kept the truck. I still can't bring myself to fix the dent in the tailgate. If this story leaves you with anything, let it be this. Don't measure a person's worth by their watch, their car, or the seat they're given at dinner. Character shows up in how people treat you when they think you have nothing left to offer them, because power moves, money moves, titles change hands overnight. But how you treated someone when you thought it didn't matter. That stays with you long after the room empties out, long after the applause, long after everyone who filmed you walking out has forgotten they ever hit record. If you've ever been counted out by someone who had no idea what you were actually capable of, hit that like button right now. That's exactly the energy this story needed to find you. Then comment still here if you've ever walked out of a room quietly, already knowing you'd won. I read every single one, and I want to know your story. And subscribe for more soul-lifting, emotional life stories like this. You will not want to miss any of our amazing stories.